Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Jason and Emily Walker thought they'd found paradise, a secluded home, endless possibilities, and freedom from strict HOA rules. But their dream turned into a nightmare when Karen Banks, the relentless HOA president next door, set her sights on controlling what wasn't hers. Little did she know, Jason wasn't one to back down. Jason and Emily Walker were a couple in their early 30s, eager to leave behind the hustle and bustle of Portland to embrace a quieter, more self-sufficient lifestyle. When they stumbled upon a listing for a charming 3-acre property in rural Oregon, they knew it was their dream home. The property featured a cozy craftsman-style cottage with an open front porch, a spacious backyard that Emily envisioned transforming into a lush garden, and a private driveway stretching nearly half a mile from the main road. Jason, an engineer with a passion for restoring antique furniture, saw endless possibilities in the property's detached garage, which could serve as his workshop. Emily, a florist and garden enthusiast, immediately fell in love with the potential for growing her own flowers, vegetables, and herbs. For them, the house wasn't just a home, it was a blank canvas for their dreams. The property bordered an upscale residential development known as Brookhaven Trails. The meticulously maintained community of cookie-cutter homes was managed by a well-known and infamously strict Homeowners Association, HOA. Brookhaven's manicured lawns and pastel-colored houses contrasted sharply with the Walkers' more rustic, independent haven. Fortunately for Jason and Emily, their property was legally excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction, a fact they confirmed thoroughly during the buying process. For the first few weeks after moving in, life was idyllic. Jason spent his evenings setting up his woodworking shop, while Emily worked tirelessly in her garden, planting rows of lavender and marigolds alongside a small vegetable patch. On weekends, they would sit together on their porch, sipping coffee as the early morning mist rolled over their property. Their peace, however, was interrupted when they began to notice a neighbor who seemed to pay them more attention than anyone else. Karen Banks, the newly elected president of the Brookhaven Trails HOA, often stopped on the edge of their driveway, arms crossed, surveying their property with a scrutinizing gaze. Karen was the quintessential HOA president, meticulous, authoritative, and unyielding. Known for her sharp tongue and fondness for enforcement, she had built a reputation for her zero-tolerance approach to HOA violations. To her, the Walkers' home, so different from the uniform perfection of Brookhaven, was an eyesore, a threat to the integrity of her community. At first, Jason and Emily dismissed Karen's presence as harmless curiosity. "She's probably just being nosy," Jason joked one evening as they spotted Karen slowly driving past their house. Emily nodded, though she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling Karen gave her. The Walkers had little interest in conflict. They were private people who had moved to the countryside for peace, not drama. But Karen saw things differently. To her, the Walkers represented defiance, a property outside her control, a reminder that not everything in Brookhaven could be contained by HOA rules. And Karen didn't like losing control. It didn't take long for Karen to escalate from curious onlooker to self-proclaimed enforcer. A week later, Jason found a letter tucked into their mailbox. It was written on HOA letterhead and signed by Karen Banks herself. The letter politely informed them that their property was creating visual and auditory disturbances for the community and requested that they consider adhering to Brookhaven Trails' aesthetic guidelines to maintain harmony with the neighborhood. Jason chuckled when he read it. "Does she even know we're not part of the HOA?" he asked Emily, waving the letter. Emily frowned, sensing this was only the beginning. The Walkers' idyllic life had been noticed, and Karen Banks was not one to let anything or anyone slip through her grasp. The first letter from Karen Banks seemed more like a misunderstanding than a true problem. Jason and Emily, confident in their legal independence from the HOA, saw no reason to worry. Jason crafted a polite response, attaching copies of their property deed and other legal documents that clearly showed their property was not part of Brookhaven Trails. He even hand-delivered the letter to Karen's house, thinking a direct, friendly approach might diffuse any tension. Karen, however, was not someone who appreciated being corrected. A week later, another letter arrived. This one was far less polite. Karen accused the Walkers of ignoring her community recommendations and threatened them with fines for violations of Brookhaven Trails bylaws. The letter specifically cited Jason's woodworking shop as an industrial nuisance and claimed Emily's garden was an eyesore that clashed with the community's aesthetic standards. Jason and Emily were stunned. The idea that their peaceful activities could somehow disturb the pristine lawns of Brookhaven Trails was absurd, especially since their property was separated from the development by a row of thick pines. Jason responded firmly this time, reiterating their exemption from HOA rules and asking Karen to stop sending them correspondence. Karen's response was not what they expected. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. Over the following weeks, Karen escalated her efforts. One morning, Emily spotted a man with a camera taking photos of their property from the roadside. He seemed startled when she approached him, mumbling something about being hired for an inspection before hastily leaving. Another time, Jason noticed unfamiliar footprints in the soft soil near the garden after a rainy night. "I think someone's been snooping around," Jason said, his brow furrowed as he examined the footprints. Emily felt a chill run through her. "You don't think it's Karen, do you?" she asked. "She's persistent," Jason admitted, "but surely she wouldn't go that far." Their assumption was soon proven wrong. One Saturday afternoon, as Jason was working in his garage, he caught sight of Karen herself standing at the edge of his workshop window, peering inside. The audacity of it left him momentarily speechless. Gathering himself, Jason marched outside. "Karen, what are you doing on my property?" Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she squared her shoulders and replied, "I'm conducting a routine community inspection. We've received numerous complaints about this building." Jason stared at her in disbelief. "This isn't Brookhaven Trails. You have no authority here." Karen's face hardened. "All properties adjacent to the community are subject to our standards. You may think you're exempt, but I assure you that's a misunderstanding on your part." Jason shook his head, his voice firm. "It's not a misunderstanding. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll call the police." Karen glared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over," she said, before storming off. That evening, Jason installed a set of security cameras around the property, sensing that Karen's persistence was far from over. Emily, growing more anxious by the day, suggested they speak with a lawyer, just to be prepared. Jason agreed, though he hoped it wouldn't come to that. The Walkers had tried to handle the situation diplomatically, but Karen's relentless behavior made it clear that she wasn't going to back down easily. What had started as an odd annoyance was quickly becoming a full-blown conflict, one that neither Jason nor Emily had anticipated. Jason and Emily were growing weary of Karen's antics. The letters, the intrusions, the veiled threats, all of it was becoming more than a nuisance. They had hoped the security cameras would serve as a deterrent, but Karen's determination only seemed to grow. For a few days, things seemed quiet, and the Walkers allowed themselves to relax. "Maybe she's finally realized she can't push us around," Emily suggested one evening as they planned a short trip to visit Jason's parents. They were gone for 3 days, enjoying the break and assuming their absence would go unnoticed. They couldn't have been more wrong. As they drove back toward their property late Sunday afternoon, Jason and Emily immediately noticed something was off. Where the driveway should have opened to their familiar stretch of road leading to their home, there now stood a set of towering wrought iron gates. Jason slammed the brakes, staring in disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, stepping out of the car to inspect the structure. The gates were brand new, freshly painted, and locked with a heavy-duty padlock. On the side was a sign. "Private property of Brookhaven Trails, HOA, authorized access only." Emily got out of the car, her face pale. "Is this some kind of joke? How can they block the driveway to our house?" Before Jason could answer, a familiar figure emerged from a nearby car parked off to the side. Karen, dressed impeccably as always, approached with a self-satisfied smirk. "Lovely, aren't they?" she said, gesturing to the gates. "I thought it was time to establish some boundaries." "Karen," Jason began, his voice tight, "what is this? Why are there gates blocking our driveway?" Karen clasped her hands together, feigning innocence. "Well, Jason, after reviewing some updated property maps, it turns out this section of the road actually belongs to Brookhaven Trails. Since it's part of our community, we're ensuring its use aligns with HOA standards. Of course, if you'd like unrestricted access, you're welcome to become HOA members. Then the gates would open for you automatically, free of charge. Jason's jaw tightened. This driveway is the only access to our home. You can't just block it off. Karen raised an eyebrow. I think you'll find that I can. And if you don't believe me, feel free to check the updated documents. She handed Jason a folder containing maps and what appeared to be an official property deed, labeling the section of the road as belonging to the HOA. Jason flipped through the pages, his anger growing. This is nonsense. I know this driveway is on our land. These maps must be wrong. Karen shrugged. Then prove it. Until you do, the gates stay up. Oh, and if you need to get through in the meantime, she reached into her purse and handed him a printed invoice. We're charging a small access fee, just $50 per entry. Consider it an incentive to join the community. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling. You can't do this. This is harassment. Karen gave her a pitying smile. I'm sorry you feel that way, dear. But rules are rules. If you'd cooperated from the start, this could have been avoided. Jason crumpled the invoice in his hand. We're not paying you a cent. And we're not joining the HOA. You've gone too far this time, Karen. Karen's smirk widened. Suit yourself. But without payment or membership, those gates aren't opening. Furious but unwilling to escalate further without proper evidence, Jason and Emily parked their car off to the side and began the 15-minute walk down the road to their house. Emily fumed the entire way, while Jason silently stewed, already planning his next move. Once home, Jason wasted no time. He dug through their documents, eventually finding their original property deed. There, in clear detail, it showed the driveway was part of their private property. Relieved but still simmering with anger, Jason immediately called their lawyer, explaining the situation and forwarding all the relevant documents. By the following morning, their lawyer had an answer. The gates are illegal, he confirmed. Your deed is valid, and the road is absolutely part of your property. I've already contacted the local land office, and they're backing your claim. You have every right to remove those gates. Jason hung up the phone, a sense of vindication washing over him. But he wasn't interested in waiting for bureaucratic processes to play out. He had a simpler solution in mind. Picking up his phone, he called his old friend Ben, a nearby farmer with a well-maintained bulldozer. Ben, Jason said, his voice calm but resolute, how would you like to help me tear down some gates? The next morning, Jason stood at the end of his driveway, waiting for Ben to arrive with his bulldozer. The air was crisp, and the tension crackled like static as Jason reviewed the events of the past few days in his mind. Karen's arrogance had crossed every line, and he was done letting her antics disrupt their lives. Ben's truck rumbled down the road, towing the bright yellow bulldozer behind it. Jason greeted his friend with a firm handshake. Thanks for coming, he said, his tone steady but filled with resolve. Anything for you, Ben replied, gesturing toward the gates. Those things don't look like they belong here. Let's take care of it. As Ben prepared the bulldozer, Jason heard the sharp sound of a phone ringing nearby. He turned to see the hired security guard stationed by Karen frantically talking on his cell phone. It was clear the guard had alerted Karen, and sure enough, within minutes, Karen's car screeched to a halt at the gates. Karen stepped out, her face a mask of indignant fury. What do you think you're doing? She snapped, marching toward Jason. Jason crossed his arms. I'm removing the illegal gates you put up on my property. You had no right to install them, and I have the documents to prove it. Karen scoffed, brandishing a folder of her own. This section of the road belongs to Brookhaven Trails, as clearly outlined in our records. If you destroy these gates, I'll have you arrested for property damage. Jason's voice remained calm, though his frustration was evident. Your so-called records are fabricated. I've already confirmed with the land office that this road is part of my property. These gates are trespassing, and I'm giving you one chance to remove them yourself. Karen's lips tightened into a thin, defiant line. Over my dead body, she hissed. Jason nodded to Ben, who started the bulldozer with a roar. The machine's engine revved, and its imposing frame began inching toward the gates. Karen's defiance wavered as she realized Jason was serious. She stepped in front of the gates, her arms stretched wide. Stop this right now, Karen screamed. If you touch these gates, I'll take you to court and ruin you. Jason climbed into the cab of the bulldozer, meeting Karen's gaze with unwavering determination. Slowly, he pressed the controls, and the machine began to move forward. Karen's bravado dissolved as she jumped out of the way, nearly tripping over her own feet. With a satisfying crash, the gates buckled under the bulldozer's weight, their once pristine metal now a twisted heap. Ben backed the bulldozer away, leaving the debris sprawled across the road. Karen stood frozen, her face red with humiliation. Then she pulled out her phone and began recording. "You're going to jail for this," she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. "I have all the evidence I need." Jason stepped out of the bulldozer, holding a folder of his own. "And I have the evidence that this road is mine," he said calmly. "You want to play this in court? Be my guest." Karen, undeterred, dialed the police, insisting on an immediate response. Within 15 minutes, a patrol car arrived, and 2 officers stepped out, taking in the scene. Karen rushed to them, thrusting her phone forward and declaring Jason guilty of vandalism and trespassing. The officers listened patiently before turning to Jason. "Do you have any documents to prove your claim?" one of them asked. Jason handed over his folder, which contained his property deed, the official statement from the land office, and photographic evidence of the gate's placement. The officers reviewed the materials, nodding as they conferred quietly. One of them finally turned to Karen. "Ma'am, based on this documentation, it's clear that this road is part of Mr. Walker's property. These gates were illegally installed, and he had every right to remove them." Karen's face twisted with fury. "This is ridiculous. He's lying. You're all incompetent," she screamed. The second officer stepped forward, his expression stern. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. We've reviewed the evidence, and there's nothing further to discuss here." But Karen's anger boiled over. "You're all fools!" she shouted, jabbing a finger at the officer's chest. The officer's patience snapped when Karen's hand made contact, and he immediately grabbed her wrist. "That's enough," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer." As Karen was led to the patrol car, she continued to scream, vowing revenge. Jason watched silently, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. For now, the gates were gone, but he knew this wasn't the end of Karen's schemes. He'd won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. The tension following Karen's arrest lingered like a storm cloud over the neighborhood. Jason and Emily hoped this would be the end of her schemes, but they knew better than to relax completely. Karen wasn't someone who gave up easily. True to form, Karen wasted no time trying to turn the situation to her advantage. Within days of her release, Jason received a certified letter from her lawyer, accusing him of property damage, harassment, and threatening the safety and dignity of a community leader. The letter demanded an immediate payment of $25,000 in damages, along with a formal apology to the Brookhaven Trails HOA. Jason chuckled bitterly as he read the letter aloud to Emily. "Dignity? That's rich, coming from someone who threw a tantrum and got herself arrested," he said. Despite the ridiculousness of the accusations, Jason knew this was a calculated move. Karen wasn't just trying to intimidate him, she was trying to create a paper trail that painted her as the victim. Jason forwarded the letter to his lawyer, who responded swiftly with a counterclaim. The counterclaim cited Karen's illegal gate installation, trespassing, and the documented damage her actions had caused to Jason's property. Along with this, Jason's lawyer included a statement of intent to file for additional damages if Karen continued her campaign of harassment. Karen's response came in the form of more theatrics. She began hosting impromptu HOA meetings in front of the now cleared gate, loudly declaring to anyone who would listen that Jason was a menace to the community. A handful of residents, those loyal to Karen, joined her, snapping pictures and muttering about how Jason's actions were ruining the harmony of Brookhaven Trails. Jason, however, remained calm. He meticulously documented every interaction, kept a detailed record of all communications, and ensured his lawyer had access to all the evidence. Karen's attempts to paint herself as the victim finally crumbled when the local prosecutor reviewed the footage of her assaulting the police officer during her arrest. Combined with the falsified documents she had submitted, it became clear that Karen's actions were part of a larger pattern of manipulation and abuse of power. The charges against Karen began to stack up: assaulting an officer, filing falsified documents, trespassing, and harassment. The prosecutor, recognizing the potential severity of the case, decided to proceed with criminal charges, leaving Karen facing both civil and criminal repercussions. For Jason and Emily, it felt like a victory long overdue. Still, they knew that the process wasn't over, and they remained vigilant, documenting everything as the legal system began its slow march toward justice. After Karen's arrest and the mounting legal cases against her, life at the Walkers' property began to return to normal. For the first time in months, Jason and Emily felt a sense of peace. With Karen temporarily silenced, they seized the opportunity to reclaim their space. Jason installed sturdy new gates at the entrance to their driveway, reinforced with steel and equipped with a keypad for controlled access. He also expanded his network of security cameras, covering every angle of the property. "Just in case," he said, knowing better than to underestimate Karen's persistence. Emily, too, found solace in her garden, planting new rows of flowers and vegetables while enjoying the quiet serenity that had drawn them to this home in the first place. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet remained unbroken. The couple allowed themselves to believe that Karen's legal troubles and mounting accusations might have finally subdued her. Jason's lawyer occasionally updated him on the progress of the case, which included Karen facing criminal charges for her assault on the police officer and civil suits from both Jason and other Brookhaven residents. One crisp autumn morning, the peace was shattered. Jason was in his workshop when the distant roar of heavy machinery caught his attention. Frowning, he checked the live feed from his security cameras and froze. A bulldozer, guided by none other than Karen herself, was barreling down the road toward his newly installed gates. Jason grabbed his phone, immediately calling the police. "Karen's at it again," he told the dispatcher, his voice calm but laced with frustration. "She's on a bulldozer, and she's about to destroy my property." By the time Jason reached the driveway, the damage had already begun. Karen, with a look of triumph on her face, had plowed through one side of the gates, leaving them bent and mangled. She jumped down from the bulldozer, clutching a stack of papers she waved in Jason's direction. "This road belongs to the HOA," she screamed, her voice echoing across the property. "I have proof, and I'm taking back what's ours." Jason stood his ground, calmly raising his phone to record the entire scene. "You're trespassing and destroying private property, Karen," he said. "Again. You won't get away with it this time." Moments later, the sound of sirens filled the air as police cars pulled up. Officers stepped out, quickly assessing the scene. Karen, emboldened by what she believed to be her new evidence, shoved her papers at the nearest officer. "Arrest him," she demanded. "This land is HOA property, and he's been stealing it for years." The officer reviewed the documents, his expression turning grim. "Ma'am," he said, holding up one of the papers, "these documents appear to be falsified." Again, Karen's triumphant demeanor crumbled. "You don't know what you're talking about," she shrieked. "I'm the president of this HOA. I have rights." Jason calmly handed over his original deed, as well as the court's previous ruling affirming his ownership of the road. The officers nodded and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for destruction of property, trespassing, and submitting falsified documents," one officer said, pulling out handcuffs. Karen's protest turned into a furious, incoherent rant as she was escorted to the police car. Jason watched as she was driven away, feeling both vindicated and weary. The gates could be repaired, but the damage Karen had caused over the months had left its mark on their lives. Though justice seemed imminent, Jason and Emily knew better than to let their guard down. This might have been Karen's last desperate act, but the consequences of her obsession would ripple through Brookhaven trails for months to come. With Karen's second arrest, the long and grueling battle finally seemed to reach its conclusion. For Jason and Emily, it was a bittersweet victory. On one hand, they had defended their property and their rights, standing firm against Karen's relentless harassment. On the other, the ordeal had cost them countless hours of stress and energy, leaving them both relieved and exhausted. The legal proceedings moved quickly this time, as Karen's actions were undeniable. Her bulldozer stunt, the destruction of Jason's new gates, and the falsified documents she had submitted to the police were enough to secure multiple charges against her. In court, Karen appeared defiant at first, but as the evidence mounted, her confidence eroded. The judge ruled decisively. Karen was found guilty of destruction of property, trespassing, and falsification of legal documents. Adding to her woes, she was also held accountable for the prior assault on the police officer. The sentence was harsh but fair. Karen was sentenced to 2 years in prison, along with mandatory restitution payments to Jason and the HOA members who had suffered under her leadership. Meanwhile, Brookhaven Trails underwent a transformation. The The remaining members of the HOA, embarrassed by Karen's behavior, voted to disband the current board and implement reforms. Transparency and fairness became the new priorities, with residents now more engaged in ensuring the HOA served the community rather than controlling it. Jason and Emily finally reclaimed the peace they had sought when moving to the countryside. With the gates repaired and the cameras still in place, their property became a symbol of resilience and independence. Neighbors who once hesitated to speak out against Karen began visiting the Walkers, apologizing for their silence and offering their support. The lasting impact of the ordeal was clear. Karen's actions had not only backfired, but also inspired broader changes. State lawmakers, alerted to the story through local media, began considering new legislation to curb HOA overreach and protect homeowners' rights. For Jason and Emily, the greatest reward was the simple joy of returning to their routine. Jason in his workshop, Emily in her garden, and the two of them sharing quiet evenings on their porch. Karen's presence was finally a distant memory, her legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of power misused and justice served.